We're starting on chapter 9, where the chapter title says May of 1959. Here we go. James peered at me from behind thick, dark lashes. We'd been writing regularly for the past 2 months, almost every day. At times, twice a day. I wrote what I could, only a few words. I would have loved to write more. My English still needed more vocabulary. Surrounded by Italians, we always spoke in our native tongue. I leaned against the railing of the factory gates, admiring James standing a few steps away. Today he'd come to take me for a walk in the center of Long Sutton. Not a lot to see there. Then again, we weren't here to sightsee. We were here for each other. Hand in hand, we had walked around the park and town square, hardly talking. Just being together pleased us. I often thought of him during the day, imagining what he did, smiling to myself like an idiot. I was amazed James took an interest in me. We couldn't even speak the same language. Bianca! Chiara shouted from the factory, tapping her watch. The girls had allowed me to slip away from work, and it was time to go. I didn't want to get in trouble. In 2 strides, James was so close, his breath tickled my face. Adrenaline shot through my body, and butterflies came to life. A sensation I loved. Yet, I was still so uneasy in his company. Normally outspoken, I became tongue-tied when he popped on the scene. That, and the fact that I hadn't mastered the language well enough yet. I go now? I said, and the corner of James's mouth dropped. I want to see you again. Ever so gently, he took my hand and brought it to his lips. My ribs rose and fell as he placed a kiss to the back of my hand. His warm, firm mouth sent shivers racing down my back. Say yes, Bianca. I returned my gaze to his and nodded. I did that a lot lately, nod and agree. He released my hand and stroked my cheek with the back of his hand. I'll come the day after tomorrow, on Thursday. Dopo domina giovedì. My eyes widened. Had he been learning Italian? Se parler in Italiano? He threw his head back and laughed. Whoa, hang on there. I haven't a clue what you're talking about. I pointed at him. Speak Italian? He shook his head and held up a finger, then 2. Uno or 2 parole. I smiled. He was making an effort to communicate without Ornella. We wanted to have a bit of privacy. Either he'd have to learn Italian or I'd have to learn English. Maybe we'd both make an effort. Dopo domani? He repeated. Yes. He pulled up his sleeve and showed me his watch. At what time? I held up 5 fingers. He beamed down at me before pulling something from his coat pocket. This is for you, he said, and handed me a miniature English/Italian dictionary. Thank you. Exactly what I needed. With this mini translator and the English books Ornella had lent me, I should be able to communicate on my own pretty soon. In fact, as of now, I'd write my own letters. Enough of the girls chipping in with their comments and suggesting inappropriate sentences. I waved goodbye and stepped through the factory gates, pleased with my gift. I took a quick peek inside. He'd written a few words accompanied with a love heart, and heat radiated through my chest. If I wrote to him now, with a bit of luck, he'd get the letter tomorrow morning. I needed to thank him. What better way than to write with the help of my new phrase book? Once in my room, I pulled out my writing equipment. It was quiet in the flat without Ornella and Florinda. Perfect. A bit of peace to think. I chewed my pen, staring at the phrase book. What I could write to please my boyfriend. Bianca! Bianca! I looked up from sealing the cardboard boxes. James is waiting for you at the factory gates. Doesn't look over the moon. I gazed at my watch. Not 5 o'clock, not Thursday either. Why had he come a day earlier? And why had Chiara and he looked unhappy? Sound good. No sooner had I stepped out of the factory gates than James fired his first question. Why, Bianca? I blinked rapidly. Why what? Something must have upset the man for him to come all this way to ask me a question I hadn't a clue how to answer. James pulled out my letter out of his trouser pocket and held it in front of me. You wrote, "Goodbye, dear James." Why? Where are you going? Does this mean we're finished? I reached up and caressed his face. No problem, Caro. I go nowhere. At least not for the moment. You wrote goodbye. I know. I write arrivederci. Is goodbye. James glanced around as if looking for answers. Is not goodbye, goodbye. Is goodbye, goodbye. I tried to put more intonation into the second part of my sentence. The frown between his eyes disappeared, so he must have understood. He raked a hand through his hair. You scared me. My vision blurred. I made him suffer, yet how would he react if I returned to Italy? In a rush of emotions, James pulled me into his arms and kissed me hard. My legs buckled and butterflies were no longer fluttering quietly in the pit of my stomach. They were having a ball. God, I loved being in his arms. Definitely the best place in the world to be. I threw my arms around him as if it were the natural thing, wrapping them around his waist. Don't you ever say goodbye again. I could only nod. He kissed me goodbye, and although he'd put on a brave face, he had to be hurting inside. My work permit would come to an end in a few months, and I had to decide if I wanted to renew it. I didn't particularly want to go home, but I didn't want to carry on working in the factory either. My dream was to become a professional dress designer and make a name for myself. Maybe my goals were too high. Italy was the place to be for fashion, not with the rules back home. If I'd had a great time in England, I'd learned to be more independent. And although I hadn't been able to search for a dream or a dressmaking job, I'd achieved something by deciding things for myself. Meeting James had been a bonus. Didn't stop me from hurting, though. James climbed onto the bus and vanished to the back. I waved, unaware if he saw me. The bus disappeared out of sight, and I ambled back to the factory. Tomorrow, Florinda would be back from her month's break in Italy. I was dying to catch up on the news. She'd never been one for writing. 1 letter in 4 weeks, and even then, she'd had nothing about what was happening back home. Before leaving, my sister had said that on her return, she'd make the decision whether to end her contract or renew. We got good wages after all, and she'd admitted that a few more months working wouldn't harm anyone. Maybe I'd been wrong to choose James over my family. I'd only known the man for a month. What had pushed me to stay? His sorrowful eyes when he'd asked me not to leave? Or his warm, pleading voice? I'd had second thoughts since, envious that Florinda had been the one asked in the family's warmth, regretting not being able to speak with my friends. A whole year was a long time. What would things be like when I went back? Would I ever be at home there again? There's a small break in the story. Time has moved on. Florinda rushed into my arms and broke into tears. "I'm so happy to be back," she managed to say between two sobs. I reckon she'd be upset because she'd had to leave the family again. My eyes glimmered as she clutched me like her life depended on it, her tears dampening my hair. She pulled back and wiped her nose on the back of her hand before talking flat out. Her gibberish was getting to me. A habit of hers when things don't go to plan or she was uptight. "It can't be that bad, surely." I handed her a hanky. She blew her nose and took in a deep breath. "You can't imagine. I thought I'd go crazy. Papa was worse than ever. I couldn't make any decisions or go where I wanted. When I tried to protest, he sent me to my room. No lipstick or high heels allowed. Mama had to go out and buy me a pair of flatties." My eyes widened. She had to be making this up. "For Christ's sake, Bianca, I'm 25. An adult, not a child. And when Papa did let me out, he followed hot on my heels, watching my every move." I hugged her again, realizing she must have gone through hell despite Vittorio's absence. "I missed my freedom, Bianca. It was awful. 100 times worse than before. As if Papa was making me pay for leaving." "What about Mama?" "We spent a lot of time together talking. She questioned me about our life in England. About you. If we were happy and when we would be going back for good." I collapsed on the bed and stared at my sister. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing. No point in upsetting Mama further. I think she's the one who's suffering the most. We spoke about Vittorio exiled in Venezuela. Papa refuses to forgive him, so Vittorio refuses to return. I'm tempted to do the same." I picked at the skin around my thumb. Was she serious? "How are the others?" I asked, hoping none of them had turned into another Vittorio. Florinda came to sit next to me. "I didn't see much of Nino because he was studying in Naples." "Still wants to be an architect?" "Yeah. And still the same quiet boy, or young man, I should say. I can't believe he's 21. A weak smile cracked my face. "I wonder if he misses Vittorio." Nino used to follow his brother around like an obedient dog, always ready to please him. A way of getting a bit of attention, I suppose. "And the other two?" "Fortunato is the same fragile little boy. He's the one closest to Mama. Helps her all he can with the daily chores. Luca was the one who took things really badly when you didn't show up." I swallowed hard, recalling the promise I'd made to stay with him. Promise I hadn't been able to keep. "When I arrived without you, Luca didn't even bother welcoming me. He fled to the garden, where I found him later crying under the pomegranate tree. A tear rolled down my cheek. Luca had always been sensitive and didn't deserve the pain I'd caused him. Would he ever forgive me? All in all, not a lot has changed. Florinda rubbed my arm, bringing me out of my reverie. I didn't expect things to take a dramatic turn. The more I think about it, Bianca, the more we have to face the fact that life is not going to be bearable back home. I chewed the inside of my cheek. Being away from home hadn't changed my father's strict ways. Maybe I'd been asking too much, hoping my absence would have made Papa come to his senses. If what Florinda had said was true, and she wasn't one to lie or exaggerate, then there was no future for me in Santa Maria la Carita. Living with my parents until my father found a man for me to marry didn't appeal to me. Not my idea of a life. Should things take a bad turn, I'd end up like my cousin, Emilia. Her father hadn't found a man good enough for her to marry, so the poor woman ended up a spinster, looking after her old parents. I closed my eyes and said a silent prayer. Not what I wanted. On the other hand, was there a future for me here? I had my freedom, I had my sister, and I had a job. Could I see myself working in a factory for the rest of my life? Unless something spectacular happened in the next few months, like being hired as a designer in London, which wouldn't happen because I hadn't started contacting the boutiques yet, I'd return to Italy. But I'd had a taste of freedom, and I liked it. Going back to Italy would be like drinking white wine again when I tasted champagne. The more I thought of it, the more I wanted to stay in England. But it would be nice to go home for a visit, to see my family again. Okay, for the record, I like white wine. So... The beautiful day drew to an end. Hand in hand, James and I walked back to the factory. He'd taken me for a picnic amongst daisies and buttercups in a quiet field on the outskirts of the town. He'd even prepared our lunch. We arrived at the factory gates, and I had to tell him. I'd been practicing my speech for days, repeating it over and over again in my mind. I took in a deep breath. My contract finish? I go to Italy, but I come back. When are you coming back? He uttered in a whisper. September? Dog barking. James rubbed a hand over his face. Oh, I knew this would come. Didn't think it would be so soon. I'm not prepared. My mouth ran dry. I imagined how difficult this had to be for him, and I hated myself. My eyes stung with fresh tears as concern etched his face. Yet his features showed something else. Sorrow? Confusion? He placed his hands on either side of my face, his fingers gentle but firm. I love you, he whispered, and I'm not going to let you go. I know if you return to Italy, you won't come back. Do you understand? I nodded and gazed into his eyes, trying to swallow that lump that had been at the back of my throat since I brought up the subject. We're getting married. Fidanzato? Yes, he replied. My eyes glimmered. How could anyone be so nice, so calm? Never an angry word, never raising his voice when he spoke. So different from the Italian men, and I was falling hard for this gentle man. He gave me a long, meaningful kiss and pulled a box from his jacket pocket. "This is for you." With shaky hands, I took the red velvet box and opened it slowly. A solitary diamond on a delicate band of gold stared up at me, sparkling in the light. "Oh, I like very much." James slipped it on my finger. "I'm glad you do." He took my hand and brought it to his mouth. "I love you, Bianca. You make me so happy." He lowered his head and slid his mouth along my chin before pressing his lips to the hollow of my ear. My breathing came on heavier. He cupped my face in his hands, bringing his mouth over mine, and I took in his sweet breath. God, I'd never get enough of his kisses. I gazed up into his dark eyes. "Why you like me, James?" He reached for my hand and kissed my palm. "You're beautiful. Not pushy like some other girls I've been out with. You speak your mind. You're honest. You're caring. And I simply want to be with you." Heat radiated through my chest. He had a way with words, and I'd never tire of listening to his low, warm voice. People often spoke about their soulmates. Could James be mine? Another break in the story. "Hey girls," I called as I arrived back at the factory. Excuse me. "Look what James gave to me." I held up my left hand and showed them my friendship ring. Someone cheered, then someone else. Soon shouts and excited screams rose in volume, filling the dormitory. "Hey, Darth." Ornella shouted over the din. "You're so lucky. When's the wedding date?" I stared at her as if she'd just grown two heads. "What are you talking about? It's only a friendship ring." Ornella snatched my hand and inspected my finger. "Friendship ring my foot? I've been around long enough to know that is a solitary diamond is an engagement ring." I came over hot and cold. Had I misunderstood what the ring meant? In Italy, when a couple got fidanzato, it was for several years. All the boys in Italy got engaged to girls. It didn't mean anything serious. It implied that we could go out together in a sort of official way with the family's consent. Hell, had I agreed to marry the man I'd only known for 2 months? I inspected my ring, and reality hit me full in the face. I'd agreed to marry James, but I hadn't think it would have been so quick. What did I know about the man? Apart from the fact that he was madly in love with me, I hardly knew him. Was I stepping into wedlock too easily? Marriage was one hell of a big step to take, yet James was determined to make things work. And so would I. Right now, we cared about being with each other. From the little we'd been together, I'd discovered his patience, consideration, and understanding. Surely all this wasn't just one big show. I peered down at my ring again. No, James wasn't acting. He loved me. And I reckon if I was prepared to give everything up for him, then I'd have to be in love with him too. Deep down, I was sure of it.